The Seattle rain drummed a relentless, rhythmic beat against the concrete pillars of the Harborview restaurant's underground parking garage. Liam Moore stood frozen in the shadows, his tailored coat damp, his eyes locked on the familiar silhouette of his own midnight blue Range Rover. The engine was off, but the windows were completely fogged over from the inside, obscuring a chaotic, desperate movement. As he stepped closer, wiping a single streak across the condensation of the passenger window, he saw her. His wife of 7 years, Catherine, her fingers tangled in the hair of a man who was not him. The betrayal didn't ignite a fiery explosion in Liam's chest. Instead, a cold, calculated rage took over, an absolute freezing of his soul. He didn't scream. He didn't bang on the glass. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and decided to destroy her world in absolute silence. If stories like this speak to you, stay with me. The rain in Seattle didn't fall. It hung in the air like a cold, miserable breath. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 10, and the underground parking structure of the Harborview restaurant smelled of wet concrete and expensive exhaust. Liam Moore walked with a quiet, measured cadence. He had left his office at the architectural firm early, a rare occurrence, hoping to catch his wife before her dreary networking gala wrapped up. He held a sleek, black umbrella, though he hadn't opened it yet. His eyes scanned the dimly lit expanse of level P3. Catherine had texted him earlier, parked in the far corner. Valet was full. Hate these heels. Miss you. Liam smiled faintly at the memory of the text. He turned the corner past a row of concrete pillars. There it was, their midnight blue Range Rover, a custom anniversary gift he had bought her last year. It was parked awkwardly across 2 spots in the darkest alcove of the garage, shielded from the security cameras by a massive ventilation shaft. Liam frowned. The headlights were off, but the interior was pitch black. As he took a few steps closer, his custom leather shoes making no sound against the damp floor, he noticed something strange. The windows were entirely opaque, frosted over with heavy condensation from the inside. He stopped. The garage was practically empty, echoing only with the distant hum of traffic from the street above. A faint, rhythmic squeak vibrated from the heavy chassis of the SUV. The vehicle was rocking, barely perceptible, but unmistakable to a man who possessed a pathological attention to detail. A normal husband might have run forward. A normal husband might have yelled, banged his fists against the reinforced glass, or dialed his wife's number to watch the glowing screen illuminate the deceit. Liam was not a normal husband. His chest tightened, a vice gripping his lungs, but his heart rate paradoxically slowed down. A chilling, absolute clarity washed over his brain. He stepped up to the driver's side door, his breathing shallow. He raised his index finger and slowly, silently, wiped a 4-inch line across the fogged glass. The yellow hue of a distant sodium vapor lamp spilled into the narrow clearing he had made. There was Catherine. Her signature auburn hair, usually pinned in a flawless chignon, was a tangled mess around her shoulders. Her head was thrown back against the leather headrest, her eyes closed, and hovering over her, his hands gripping the collar of her expensive silk blouse, was a man Liam had never seen before. For 10 agonizing seconds, Liam simply watched. He studied the stranger's sharp jawline, the aggressive way his hands moved, the silver watch glinting on his wrist. He studied his wife's face, not twisted in coercion, but flushed with a desperate, greedy surrender. The rage that bloomed inside Liam wasn't hot or fiery. It was liquid nitrogen. It froze his veins, numbed his nerve endings, and killed the man he had been just 5 minutes prior. The love he held for Catherine shattered, not with an explosion, but with the quiet, devastating sound of ice cracking on a winter lake. He reached into the inner pocket of his trench coat and pulled out his phone. His thumb moved with terrifying steadiness. He opened the camera app, held the lens against the cleared streak of glass, and recorded exactly 15 seconds of high-definition video. When he stopped recording, he didn't put the phone away. He opened the Land Rover security app. His thumb hovered over the controls. With a few swift taps, he engaged the child locks on all the doors, rolled up the windows to their maximum seal, disabled the internal manual overrides, and activated the immobilizer. The SUV flashed its hazard lights once. A silent, mocking wink in the dark. Inside the car, the man jerked his head up, startled by the sudden mechanical click of the deadbolts engaging. Catherine's eyes snapped open, wide and terrified, staring blindly into the darkness of the garage. Liam didn't stay to watch them panic. He turned on his heel, his face an emotionless mask, and walked back into the cold Seattle rain, leaving his wife locked in a steel cage of her own making. The game had just begun. The gray light of a Seattle dawn filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Mercer Island home, casting long, pale shadows across the minimalist living room. Liam Moore stood motionless by the kitchen island, nursing a cup of black espresso that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. It was exactly 6:15 in the morning. He had not slept. Instead, he had spent the night existing in a terrifying state of absolute lucidity, mourning the death of his marriage in perfect silence. The heavy oak front door clicked open. The sound of the deadbolt sliding back was deafening in the quiet house. Catherine stepped into the foyer. She moved with a cautious, fragile stiffness, a stark contrast to her usual commanding presence. Her auburn hair, always maintained with expensive precision, was hastily gathered at the nape of her neck. The tailored silk blouse she had worn to the gala was heavily creased, and Liam's sharp eyes immediately caught the missing pearl button near her collarbone. Liam set his espresso cup down. The ceramic clinked softly against the marble. "Morning," he said, his voice smooth and entirely devoid of inflection. "You're early, or late." Catherine flinched. She dropped her keys into the silver bowl on the console table, the metallic clatter betraying her trembling hands. "Late," she replied, her voice raspy, lacking its usual confident timbre. She wrapped her arms around her torso as if to hold herself together. "The most absurd thing happened, Liam. The Range Rover. It just died in the Harborview garage." Liam leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. He played the role of the attentive husband with frightening ease. "Died? It's practically brand new. The dealership just serviced it last month. The electrical system completely failed," she lied, forcing herself to meet his gaze. Her pupils were dilated, swimming in a cocktail of exhaustion and lingering panic. The doors locked automatically. The manual override wouldn't engage. "I was trapped inside for hours before an overnight security guard finally noticed and had to call a mechanic to pry the lock open." Liam kept his facial muscles entirely relaxed, offering a canvas of mild, husbandly concern. "Trapped? That sounds terrifying, Catherine. Were you alone?" He watched her carefully. He saw the micro-expression of sheer terror flash across her eyes, the slight, involuntary swallow, the way her fingers dug into the fabric of her coat. "Of course," she said smoothly, recovering her poise. "Just me and a dead battery in the dark. I was so exhausted once they got me out. I ended up taking a cab to Sarah's place to sleep for a few hours. It was too late to wake you." Sarah Chin, her most loyal friend. A perfectly constructed, verifiable alibi, assuming Sarah was already coached on what to say. Liam took a slow breath. From across the kitchen island, he could smell it. Beneath her expensive perfume and the sterile scent of the rain, there was a faint, sharp undercurrent of a musky cedarwood cologne. It was not his. The scent mingled with the undeniable, stale odor of fierce sweat. He imagined the sheer panic she must have endured when the locks engaged, the frantic scrambling in the pitch-black SUV, the humiliating realization that she was caged with her lover, completely at the mercy of the machine. He smiled. It was a warm, forgiving smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just glad you're safe," Liam said softly. "We'll have the dealership tow it this morning and demand a full diagnostic. A glitch like that is dangerous." Catherine exhaled a long, shaky breath, her shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. "Yes, very dangerous." She stepped closer, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Liam did not pull away. He allowed her lips to brush his skin, feeling nothing but a clinical, chilling detachment. He was no longer a participant in this marriage. He was a silent architect, carefully analyzing the structural flaws of a condemned building before initiating the demolition. "Go take a shower," Liam murmured, reaching out to gently tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "You look exhausted." As Catherine turned and walked up the sweeping glass staircase, the polite smile vanished from Liam's face, replaced by a hollow, predatory stare. He picked up his phone from the marble counter. The encrypted 15-second video was secure. Now, it was time to find out exactly who the man in the cedarwood cologne was, and why his wife was terrified enough to lie so flawlessly. The house remained submerged in the quiet gloom of a rainy Seattle morning. Upstairs, the faint hum of the master bathroom's exhaust fan signaled that Catherine was still in the shower, washing away the scent of the man from the garage. Downstairs, in the soundproofed confines of his architectural studio, Liam was dismantling her digital life. Liam was a man of structures and systems. He designed buildings to withstand earthquakes and gale-force winds. He understood load-bearing walls and points of critical failure. To him, a home network was just another blueprint. When they had moved into the Mercer Island property, he had personally wired the servers, establishing the firewall and the automated backup arrays. Catherine had implicitly trusted him with the administrative access, a trust she had clearly forgotten in her panic. Sitting in the blue light of his dual monitors, Liam bypassed the standard encryption protocols of her primary cloud account. He didn't need her phone. The home server captured a mirrored backup of her devices every morning at 4 a.m. His fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, devoid of hesitation or moral conflict. He was operating in a state of absolute sociopathic detachment. He extracted the messaging databases, ignoring the mundane texts from her mother and the superficial chatter with Sarah Chin. He was looking for anomalies. He ran a script to filter hidden applications and vaulted folders. Within 10 minutes, he found it. An encrypted communication app buried under the guise of a generic finance tracker. He cracked the local backup password. It was the date of her late father's death, a detail that struck Liam with a profound sense of irony. The interface loaded, displaying a single, continuous thread with a contact saved simply as S. Liam leaned back in his leather chair, his eyes scanning the time-stamped messages. He expected the sickeningly sweet prose of a secret romance. He expected to read about stolen afternoons and illicit desires. Instead, what he found made the blood freeze in his veins. S. The Harborview. Level P3. 9 p.m. Don't be late. Catherine, I can't do this tonight. Liam is expecting me home. That's a shame. I suppose I could just forward the video from the Aspen trip to his architectural firm's main server. Or perhaps to the board of Whitmore Capital. Catherine, please. I'm bringing the Q3 offshore projections. Just don't do anything. Good girl. Bring the physical flash drive. No digital footprints. Liam stopped reading. The ambient noise of the rain lashing against the window pane seemed to vanish. He scrolled higher, absorbing months of communication. The tone was never affectionate. It was entirely predatory. Sebastian Sterling. Liam had run a quick facial recognition search on the video frame from the garage to get the name. Was not a lover swept up in a tragic romance. He was a parasite. Catherine's messages were frantic, laced with a suffocating, undeniable terror. She was begging for extensions, pleading with him to leave her family alone, bargaining with fragments of Whitmore Capital's highly classified internal data. The affair had likely started as a singular, terrible mistake during a conference in Aspen, but it had metastasized into full-blown corporate espionage and extortion. Liam stared at the glowing screen. His wife was a cheater, yes, but she was also a victim, bleeding her family's legacy dry to protect the illusion of her perfect life. She had chosen to sacrifice Whitmore Capital rather than confess her sins to him. A dark, humorless chuckle escaped Liam's lips, echoing in the empty study. The betrayal was so much worse than a simple matter of the flesh. She had undervalued him. She believed he would destroy her if he found out, so she let a monster destroy their empire instead. Liam reached out and saved the entire chat log to an encrypted drive of his own. He closed the server access, leaving no trace of his intrusion. The rules of engagement had just changed. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was a war, and Liam Moore was going to burn the battlefield to ashes. The rain had finally stopped by noon, leaving the Seattle skyline looking like a bruised, gray painting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Liam's corner office at the architectural firm. His drafting table was covered in blueprints for a new commercial plaza in Bellevue, but his attention was entirely consumed by the sleek, high-end laptop sitting on his mahogany desk. Liam was a man who understood foundations. He knew that to bring down a building, you didn't attack the walls, you targeted the subterranean pillars. Sebastian Sterling was a structure, and Liam was currently mapping his stress points. On the surface, Sebastian's digital footprint was flawlessly curated. His LinkedIn profile boasted an executive position at a boutique management consulting firm in downtown Seattle, complete with an Ivy League education and a gallery of photos showcasing a charismatic, philanthropic businessman at various charity galas. He looked exactly like the kind of man a wealthy, stressed heiress like Catherine might turn to for a moment of dangerous escapism. But Liam knew better than to trust a polished facade. Facades were designed to hide cheap materials. Bypassing standard search engines, Liam accessed a series of secure, subscription-based public record databases he occasionally used for vetting massive commercial contractors. He ran Sebastian's social security number, extracted from the metadata of a heavily encrypted PDF Catherine had received months ago, and watched the pristine image of the consultant begin to rot. The Ivy League degree was real, but the consulting firm was nothing more than a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. It had no actual employees, no legitimate corporate clients, and zero active revenue streams, save for massive, irregular cash deposits from offshore accounts. Liam leaned closer to the monitor, his eyes narrowing. He began cross-referencing court records and sealed civil dockets across different states. It took him 3 hours of relentless digital excavation to unearth the pattern, and when he did, the sheer sociopathy of it made the air in his office feel thin. Sebastian Sterling was not a consultant. He was a professional parasite. 3 years ago, in Chicago, the chief financial officer of a mid-sized logistics firm had suddenly resigned, liquidated her stock options, and filed for a quiet, uncontested divorce. 2 years before that, in San Francisco, a prominent real estate developer had abruptly transferred a massive portfolio of commercial properties to an anonymous holding company before checking herself into a private psychiatric facility. Liam dug into the holding company and the logistics firm's sudden stock sell-off. The money trails were intentionally convoluted, bouncing through shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and Cyprus, but they all eventually trickled back to the Delaware P.O. box owned by Sebastian Sterling. The modus operandi was terrifyingly elegant. Sebastian didn't just target wealthy women. He targeted married women with immense corporate access and everything to lose. He would infiltrate their high society circles, isolate them, seduce them, and document every illicit encounter. Once the trap was shut, he didn't ask for cash from their personal accounts. That was too easily traceable. He demanded corporate secrets, insider trading tips, or the quiet transfer of untraceable digital assets. He was bleeding them dry while holding a knife to the throat of their marriages and their reputations. Liam closed the laptop, the sudden black screen reflecting his own stoic, emotionless face. The cedarwood cologne in the garage wasn't the scent of a passionate lover. It was the scent of a predator marking its territory. Catherine wasn't just a cheating wife anymore. She was a compromised asset, a hostage in her own life, slowly sinking Whitmore capital into the ocean just to keep her pristine reputation intact. He stood up, walking over to the expansive window, looking down at the crawling traffic below. A lesser man would have felt pity for his wife, rushing to save her from the monster she had accidentally invited into their bed. But the ice in Liam's veins held firm. Catherine had made her choice. She had prioritized her public image over their vows. And now, Liam was going to use her extortionist to burn her perfect world to the ground. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It was time to invite the parasite into their home. The glass door to Liam's office slid open, breaking the sterile silence he had meticulously cultivated all afternoon. Mark Stevens, a senior structural engineer who doubled as the firm's unofficial liaison for their joint ventures with Whitmore Capital, stepped inside. Mark looked unusually pale. He shut the heavy door behind him and immediately reached for the automated switch, lowering the frosted blinds. A severe breach of their usual open office protocol. "Liam, do you have a minute?" Mark's voice was hushed, completely lacking its usual booming, confident cadence. Liam minimized the background check on Sebastian Sterling with a single keystroke. "Always, Mark. Have a seat." "What is it?" Mark didn't sit. He approached the mahogany desk, dropping a thick, unmarked manila folder onto the polished wood. "I was running the routine weekly stress tests on our shared network. The Bellevue Plaza servers are bridged with Whitmore Capital's mainframe for the quarterly budget approvals. I wasn't looking for anything out of the ordinary, I swear to God, but the firewall tripped a silent secondary alarm." Liam kept his facial muscles perfectly relaxed. He leaned back in his leather chair, projecting the calm authority of a man fully in control. "A breach? An active hemorrhage," Mark corrected grimly. Planting his hands on the desk and leaning forward, he flipped the folder open. Pages of complex hexadecimal logs and data packet tracking filled the sheets. "Someone with top-tier executive clearance is bypassing the internal security protocols at Whitmore. They are downloading massive, highly classified files to an external, untraceable server. Q3 offshore projections, proprietary algorithms, high-net-worth client lists. It's a systemic bleed." Liam looked down at the printed logs. He recognized the timestamps immediately. The heaviest data transfers had occurred exactly 2 hours after Catherine had returned home that morning. She hadn't just been sleeping off her trauma in the guest room. She had been frantically paying her blackmailer. "Have you reported this to Whitmore's IT department or the board?" Liam asked, his voice a steady, low baritone. "No." Mark swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. "The authorization codes used to bypass the firewall. They belong to Catherine. I didn't want to trigger a board-level panic if this was just her working from a compromised home network or conducting an unannounced audit. But Liam, the volume of data moving through this shadow server. It looks like corporate espionage." "It was. And the spy was the woman who slept beside him every night." Liam felt a cold, phantom hand grip his spine. Catherine was terrified. Sebastian had tightened the leash, likely using the terrifying incident in the parking garage as leverage to accelerate his demands. She was handing over the lifeblood of her family's legacy just to keep a 15-second video and a few hotel receipts from destroying her immaculate social standing. To Liam, it was like watching an amateur take a sledgehammer to a load-bearing wall. She was going to bring the whole structure down on top of them. "You did the exact right thing coming to me first, Mark," Liam said smoothly. He reached out, calmly gathering the papers and closing the folder. He locked his eyes onto his colleague, his gaze unwavering and reassuring. "Catherine mentioned something briefly this morning about a secure, off-the-books data migration for an upcoming, highly confidential merger talk. She's been under an immense amount of stress. It's highly likely she bypassed standard protocols to expedite the transfer without alerting the lower-level analysts." Mark's shoulders visibly dropped, a profound relief washing over his strained features. "A migration, right? Jesus, Liam, I thought we were looking at a massive SEC violation. I will speak with her tonight and ensure her team patches whatever backdoor she left open." Liam lied with terrifying ease. "Bury these logs, Mark. Delete the backups of this conversation from the mainframe. If the board catches wind of a perceived leak, it could tank the Bellevue project's funding entirely." "Done. I'll scrub it right now." Mark nodded vigorously, backing toward the door. "Sorry to panic, Liam. Have a good evening." "You too, Mark." When the door clicked shut, the ambient noise of the city seemed to vanish, leaving Liam utterly alone with the heavy silence of his office. He stared at the closed manila folder. Sebastian Sterling wasn't just stealing Catherine's body. He was stealing an empire. Liam slowly opened his bottom desk drawer, dropped the folder inside, and turned the physical key. He now had the smoking gun. It was time to invite the parasite to dinner. The dining room of the Mercer Island estate was a masterclass in modern opulence. Crystal stemware caught the low, amber light of the chandelier, and the long mahogany table was meticulously set for 6. Outside, the relentless Seattle rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows, wrapping the house in a dark, claustrophobic embrace. Liam stood at the head of the table, slowly swirling a glass of deep red Cabernet. To his left sat Catherine. Her posture was rigidly perfect in an emerald evening gown, but her complexion was the color of chalk. To his right sat the evening's guest of honor, Sebastian Sterling. Liam had orchestrated the invitation through a proxy at Whitmore Capital, citing a sudden need for external risk consultation on the Bellevue Plaza expansion. Sebastian, arrogant and opportunistic, had accepted eagerly, likely assuming Catherine had arranged the dinner to facilitate another discreet data drop. He had arrived wearing a tailored charcoal suit and that distinct, musky scent of cedarwood. "It really is a pleasure to finally meet you, Liam," Sebastian said, his charismatic smile revealing perfectly white teeth. He lifted his wine glass, projecting the aura of a confident, successful peer. "Catherine has spoken highly of your architectural vision. Has she?" Liam's voice was smooth, a dark velvet that betrayed absolutely nothing. He shifted his gaze to his wife. Catherine swallowed hard, her eyes fixed blindly on her untouched plate of seared scallops. "Catherine and I share everything. We have no secrets. Isn't that right, darling?" "Of course," Catherine managed to whisper. Her voice trembled just enough for Liam to hear the raw fear vibrating beneath the single syllable. Also present were Sarah Chun, who was aggressively cutting her food to avoid the palpable, suffocating tension, and Mark Stevens, who remained oblivious to the undercurrents, happily discussing quarterly profit margins. Liam picked up his silver steak knife, turning it slowly under the chandelier's glow. "Sebastian's firm has quite the reputation. A boutique operation registered out of Delaware. Correct? I admire a man who knows how to navigate loopholes. It takes a certain kind of ruthlessness to extract maximum value from vulnerable, high-net-worth assets." Sebastian's smile tightened fractionally. He took a small sip of his wine. "We pride ourselves on efficiency and discretion." "Efficiency is crucial," Liam agreed, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the table. The ambient chatter from Mark and Sarah faded into the background. "Take my wife's Range Rover, for example. We had the most bizarre electrical failure earlier this week. A complete system lockdown. The doors deadbolt, the windows sealed tight in the lowest level of the Harborview garage. It was exactly like a steel trap." The sharp clatter of Catherine's fork, hitting her porcelain plate, echoed like a gunshot across the room. She stared at Liam, sheer terror blooming in her dilated pupils. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. Sebastian's eyes narrowed, the confident facade cracking for the very first time. He shifted his weight in the velvet dining chair, his gaze darting between husband and wife. "That sounds highly distressing." "It was fascinating, actually," Liam continued, his tone entirely conversational, almost light. He took a slow sip of his wine, keeping his cold, predatory gaze locked entirely on Sebastian. "The security app on my phone recorded the whole anomaly. It's amazing what modern technology captures in the dark. The structural integrity of the vehicle is flawless, but it only takes one forced digital override to lock the occupants inside. They are completely helpless until someone on the outside decides it is time to let them out." Silence descended upon the table, heavy and absolute. Mark, finally sensing the sudden, violent drop in the room's temperature, stopped talking mid-sentence. Sarah stared intently into her water glass. Liam raised his Cabernet toward Sebastian. "To unexpected corporate mergers," he toasted, his eyes devoid of any warmth, "and to knowing exactly who holds the keys when the doors lock." Sebastian slowly raised his glass in return, the muscles in his jaw ticking frantically. He realized, with a sudden, sinking dread, that he was not the predator at this table. He was the prey, and Liam Moore had just locked the cage. The dinner guests had departed, leaving the Mercer Island estate suffocating in a profound, ringing silence. The storm outside had intensified, the Seattle rain lashing against the glass walls of the living room like handfuls of gravel thrown by an unseen hand. Liam stood alone by the wet bar, methodically pouring 2 fingers of single malt scotch. He didn't drink it. He simply watched the amber liquid settle in the heavy crystal glass, listening. From the upstairs hallway, a choked, ragged sound broke the quiet. Liam took his time walking up the sweeping glass staircase. He found Catherine in the master bedroom, collapsed on the edge of their king-sized bed. The emerald evening gown was half unzipped, hanging limply off one pale shoulder. She was gasping for air, her hands clawing frantically at her own chest as if trying to rip away an invisible garrote. It was a full-blown panic attack. The psychological tightrope she had been forced to walk all evening had finally snapped her. Liam stepped into the room, leaning casually against the doorframe. He made no move to comfort her. He offered no soothing words, no glass of water. He simply observed her breakdown with the clinical, chilling detachment of a scientist watching a specimen react to a newly introduced toxin. "Liam," she wheezed, her chest heaving violently. Tears ruined her immaculate makeup, streaking black mascara down her cheeks. "Liam, please. I can't breathe." "You are hyperventilating, Catherine," he said, his voice a flat, calm monotone that offered zero sanctuary. "Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth." She slid off the edge of the mattress, her knees hitting the hardwood floor with a dull, heavy thud. She crawled toward him, her trembling fingers wrapping frantically around the hem of his trousers. "I know what you did," she sobbed, the words tumbling out in a hysterical, broken rush. "The car, the dinner, the way you looked at him. You know. I know you know." Liam looked down at the top of her head. "I know many things. Which specific thing are you referring to?" "Sebastian," she choked out, burying her wet face against his legs. Her entire body shook with violent tremors. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless, disgusting mistake in Aspen. I was so stressed, the board was pressuring me, and he was just there. It meant nothing, Liam. I swear to God, it meant absolutely nothing to me. This was the moment, the partial confession. Liam felt a strange, hollow sensation expand in his chest, the final, quiet severing of whatever microscopic thread of hope he had unknowingly kept alive. He stood perfectly still in the silence, listening to the rain beat against the roof, giving her the space to offer the rest of the truth. He waited for her to confess to the blackmail. He waited for her to admit to the stolen data, to the fact that she was actively bleeding her family's empire to save her own pristine reputation. Seconds ticked by. The true confession did not come. Instead, she looked up at him, her eyes bloodshot and pleading. "I ended it," she lied, her voice desperate and clawing for salvation. "I told him it was over. That's why he was at the dinner tonight, Liam. He's angry that I rejected him. He's trying to intimidate me because his ego is bruised. Please, you have to believe me. I love you. I only love you." Liam reached down, his hands cool and steady, and firmly gripped her bare shoulders. He pulled her up from the floor, holding her at arm's length. He looked deeply into her tear-filled, terrified eyes, searching for a trace of the honest woman he thought he had married 7 years ago. She was entirely gone. In her place stood a coward who valued her corporate legacy over her husband's trust. She had chosen the lie. She had sealed her own fate. "I believe you," Liam lied softly, his thumb brushing a streak of mascara from her cheek with terrifying tenderness. "I believe that you think you can handle him." Catherine collapsed against his chest, sobbing in profound, heavy relief, completely unaware that the man holding her in the dark was no longer her husband, but her executioner. The storm passed by mid-morning, leaving the Mercer Island estate bathed in a harsh, unforgiving gray light. Liam sat at the drafting table in his home studio, his posture immaculate. In front of him sat the unmarked manila folder Mark Stevens had provided, its contents neatly aligned. When Catherine finally pushed open the heavy oak door, she looked like a ghost haunting her own life. She wore a simple cashmere sweater, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, her eyes puffy and ringed with exhaustion. She offered him a fragile, hesitant smile, the smile of a woman who believed the worst was over, having survived the brutal confession of her infidelity the night before. "I made coffee," she murmured, her voice raspy. She took a step into his sanctuary, desperate to re-establish the domestic normalcy she had so recklessly jeopardized. Liam did not look up from the blueprints he was pretending to study. "Close the door, Catherine." The chill in his voice stopped her in her tracks. The fragile smile vanished. She slowly turned and pushed the door until the heavy latch clicked into place, sealing them inside the soundproofed walls. Liam swiveled his leather chair to face her. He picked up the manila folder and dropped it onto the glass surface of the coffee table between them. It landed with a dull, authoritative slap. "Sit down." She sank onto the edge of the leather sofa, staring at the folder as if it were a live explosive. Her hands began to tremble again. "Last night, you told me that Sebastian Sterling was a mistake." Liam began, his tone conversational but laced with absolute zero. "A momentary lapse in judgment in Aspen. You wept. You begged for my understanding. You assured me that his presence at our dinner table was nothing more than the desperate act of a rejected lover with a bruised ego." Catherine swallowed hard, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her own knees. "It was the truth, Liam. It was a masterclass in self-preservation," Liam corrected, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He reached out and flipped the folder open. "Open it, Catherine. Look at what your bruised lover really wanted." Her shaking fingers hovered over the papers before she finally pulled the top sheet toward her. Her breath hitched, the blood entirely drained from her face as she recognized the hexadecimal server logs, the time-stamped data packet transfers, the glaring security bypasses originating from her own administrative clearance. "You bypassed the Whitmore Capital firewalls," Liam stated, his voice devoid of anger, which only made the accusation more terrifying. "You downloaded the Q3 offshore projections, the proprietary risk algorithms, and the high-net-worth client index. And you handed them directly to a man whose entire existence is a fabricated shell designed to bleed wealthy, terrified women dry." "Liam, She choked on the words, her eyes darting frantically across the incontrovertible proof of her treason. "Do not insult my intelligence by lying again." He cut her off, the command cracking like a whip. "You thought I was just a husband to be managed. You thought if you threw me the scrap of an affair, I would be too blinded by jealousy to see the hemorrhage in the foundation. But that is the fundamental difference between us, Catherine. When I find a crack in a structure, I don't paint over it. I dig until I find the rot." Tears spilled over her lower lashes, splashing onto the printed logs. "He blackmailed me," she whispered, her voice breaking into a pathetic, desperate sob. "He had a video from the hotel room. He threatened to send it to the board, to you, to the press. If the shareholders saw it, the stock would have tanked. I would have lost my position. I was trying to protect the legacy." "You were trying to protect your pride?" Liam corrected coldly. He stood up, towering over her broken form. "You could have come to me. You could have told me what he had on you, and we could have destroyed him together. Instead, you chose to protect your pristine reputation by sacrificing the financial security of this family, and worse, by treating me like a fool who could be easily managed." He walked to the window, looking out at the gray waters of Lake Washington. "The affair hurt," Liam said quietly, the finality in his voice heavy and absolute. "But the fact that you looked me in the eye last night, crying on my chest, and chose to lie to my face while you handed our empire over to a parasite, that is what killed us, Catherine. There is nothing left to salvage here." She buried her face in her hands, her sobs echoing off the cold glass walls, mourning the absolute, undeniable destruction of the life she had dismantled with her own hands. The master bedroom, once a sanctuary of shared warmth, had transformed into a sterile, clinical interrogation room. The heavy curtains were drawn shut against the fading Seattle afternoon. Liam stood in front of Catherine, holding a small, matte black audio transmitter and a strip of medical-grade adhesive tape. Catherine sat on the edge of the velvet ottoman, staring blankly at the wall. She was dressed for the evening. A sleek, black trench coat over a muted silk blouse, but she looked entirely hollowed out. The vibrant, commanding heiress of Whitmore Capital was gone, replaced by a ghost waiting for instructions. "Unbutton the top of your blouse," Liam instructed. His voice was not cruel, nor was it angry. It was simply the voice of an architect giving a contractor a structural directive. Catherine's fingers trembled as she fumbled with the delicate pearl buttons, exposing her collarbone and the pale skin of her sternum. She squeezed her eyes shut, a solitary tear escaping to cut a hot path down her cheek. The humiliation was absolute. Liam stepped closer. He didn't hesitate. He pressed the cold metal of the micro-recorder flat against her skin, just above her heart, and secured it with the surgical tape. His knuckles brushed against her chest. Only weeks ago, such a touch would have been a prelude to intimacy. Now she flinched as if burned by dry ice. "The transmitter is live," Liam said, stepping back and wiping his hands on a towel as if he had just handled something toxic. "It is synced directly to the encrypted server in my office, and a secondary feed is routing to a private investigator I retained this morning." "Button up." Catherine mechanically obeyed, her movements stiff and robotic. "What exactly do you want me to say to him?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient hum of the house's HVAC system. "You are meeting him at the Blue Moon Bar in 30 minutes, Liam replied, pacing slowly in front of her. "It's a Tuesday night. The jazz band starts at 8. It will be loud enough to provide cover, but the microphone is calibrated to pick up localized, close proximity vocals. You will order a drink. You will look terrified." He stopped pacing and looked down at her, his eyes flat and unreadable. "Which shouldn't be difficult for you right now." Catherine swallowed hard, refusing to meet his gaze. "You will tell him that the Q3 offshore projections you provided yesterday were the last files you can safely access," Liam continued, meticulously outlining the script. "You will beg him to delete the hotel video. You need him to explicitly state the terms of the extortion on tape. He needs to acknowledge receipt of the proprietary algorithms, and he needs to verbalize the threat against Whitmore Capital. Do you understand? And if he doesn't?" she asked, a tremor of genuine panic breaking through her numb facade. "Liam, he is careful. He never writes anything explicit down. What if he refuses to say it out loud? Then you push him," Liam commanded, his tone dropping an octave, settling into a dark, unforgiving register. "You tell him you are going to the board to confess. You threaten to blow up the entire arrangement. He is a predator, Catherine. When a predator thinks its prey is escaping, it stops being careful and starts being aggressive. You will make him angry enough to boast about his leverage." He walked over to the mahogany dresser, picked up her car keys, and dropped them into her lap. The metallic clatter made her jump. "I am not doing this to save you," Liam stated quietly, stripping away any lingering, pathetic hope she might have harbored. "I am doing this to amputate a cancerous element from my life before it metastasizes into my firm's assets. You invited this monster into our home. Now you are going to serve him to me." Catherine clutched the keys, her knuckles white. She stood up, a fragile, broken silhouette against the dim light of the room. She didn't offer an apology. Apologies were useless currency now. She simply nodded, turned on her heel, and walked out the door to walk into the trap. The Blue Moon Bar was a subterranean cavern of crushed velvet and polished brass, thick with the scent of bourbon and the mournful wail of a live saxophone. Catherine sat rigid in a secluded corner booth, her hands wrapped tightly around a glass of untouched gin. She felt the cold, hard square of the transmitter pressing against her sternum with every shallow breath. Exactly at 8:15, Sebastian Sterling slid into the curved booth opposite her. He looked immaculate in a dark overcoat, radiating a dangerous, predatory confidence. He didn't order a drink. He simply leaned forward, invading her space, his eyes locking onto hers. "You look terrible, Catherine," Sebastian noted, his voice a low, mocking purr over the jazz band. "Where is the physical drive?" Catherine forced herself to meet his gaze, channeling every ounce of her genuine terror into the performance of her life. "I don't have it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "The Q3 offshore projections I gave you yesterday. That was the last of it." Mark Stevens tripped a secondary firewall alarm. "I can't access any more proprietary algorithms without triggering a board-level audit. You have to delete the hotel video. Please, Sebastian. You have enough." Sebastian's confident smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened into chips of flint. "I decide when I have enough. You will find a way to bypass the audit, or I forward the Aspen video to the entire Whitmore Capital Executive Board tomorrow at noon." The extortion arrangement was very clear. "Got him." The words echoed in Catherine's mind, but before relief could wash over her, Sebastian's expression shifted. He was a man who survived by reading the microscopic shifts in human behavior. He noticed the unnatural stiffness in her posture, the way she consciously avoided leaning against the leather backrest. Without warning, his hand shot across the small table. He grabbed the lapel of her silk blouse and jerked her forward. His knuckles brushed against her chest, feeling the unmistakable, rigid outline beneath the fabric. Sebastian froze. Then, a dark, venomous laugh rumbled in his throat. "Aguair? You arrogant, stupid bitch. You actually wore a wire." He raised his other hand, intending to rip the silk open and smash the device, but a shadow fell over the table. "I wouldn't do that." A voice cut through the ambient noise, smooth, chilling, and entirely devoid of fear. Sebastian snapped his head up. Liam Moore stepped out from the adjacent alcove, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his tailored trousers. He looked down at the man who had defiled his marriage and attempted to steal his empire, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. Sebastian slowly released Catherine's blouse, leaning back, sizing Liam up. "The architect," he sneered, regaining his arrogant composure. "I wondered when you'd step out of the blueprints. Coming to defend your wife's honor? A bit late for that, don't you think? She didn't need any blackmail to spread her legs in Aspen. She was bored of your perfect, sterile little life, Liam. She begged for it." The words were designed to gut him, to provoke a violent, humiliating public brawl. Catherine buried her face in her hands, letting out a broken, pathetic sob. Liam felt the phantom blade twist in his ribs, a final, agonizing acknowledgement of his shattered reality. But he didn't blink. He didn't clench his fists. Liam simply pulled his phone from his pocket and placed it on the table. "The transmitter you just felt is cellular, Sebastian. Every word you just said, acknowledging the Q3 files, the proprietary algorithms, and explicitly stating the terms of your extortion, was not recorded locally. It was live-streamed directly to a secure cloud server and my attorney." Sebastian's arrogant smirk instantly vanished, replaced by the pale, sudden realization of a trapped animal. "You are no longer dealing with a terrified, compromised woman," Liam continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You are dealing with me. You are facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate espionage and extortion. If you ever contact my wife, my firm, or Whitmore Capital again, I will not just send you to prison. I will make sure every shell company you own is dismantled, and every penny you've stolen is seized." Liam picked up his phone, looking down at the ruined, silent man in the booth, and then glanced at the weeping woman who was legally still his wife. "We are done here," Liam said softly, and walked away into the dark, leaving them both trapped in the wreckage. The execution was flawless, but the patient died on the table. In the 48 hours following the confrontation at the Blue Moon Bar, Liam's meticulously constructed trap snapped shut with devastating precision. He did not simply hand the audio recording over to a local precinct. He bypassed the Seattle police entirely, utilizing his firm's high-level corporate attorneys to deliver the encrypted files directly to the federal authorities handling interstate wire fraud and corporate extortion. Sebastian Sterling was arrested at Seattle-Tacoma Airport attempting to board a one-way flight to Geneva. The FBI raided his pristine downtown apartment and the shell company's Delaware P.O. box, seizing servers that contained the blackmail material of over a dozen high-profile victims. The parasite was finally excised from the host. But saving Whitmore Capital from financial ruin required a blood sacrifice, and the board of directors demanded it be Catherine. Liam sat in his quiet architectural office, watching the gray Seattle rain smear against the glass. He held a heavy crystal tumbler of sparkling water, his eyes fixed on the digital ticker of a financial news network on his secondary monitor. The scandal had not reached the mainstream tabloids. The federal gag orders and the board's aggressive PR spin had contained the explosive details of the affair, but within the insulated, cutthroat circles of Seattle's elite, the truth was a roaring fire. Catherine Whitmore, the golden heiress, was forced into an immediate, humiliating resignation. The official press release cited health reasons and a desire to focus on family. A grotesque irony that made Liam's chest tighten with a hollow, bitter ache. The board had stripped her of her security clearance, her corner office, and her legacy within a matter of hours. The empire she had betrayed her husband to protect had ultimately exiled her for the exact same treason. When Liam returned to the Mercer Island estate that evening, the silence was absolute. It was no longer the tense, vibrating silence of a hidden secret, but the dead, heavy quiet of a tomb. He found Catherine in the sunroom, curled into the corner of a linen armchair. She was wrapped in a cashmere throw, staring blankly out at the dark waters of Lake Washington. She looked 10 years older. The radiant, untouchable aura that had always surrounded her was entirely extinguished. She was a queen who had burned her own kingdom to the ground just to hide a single dirty secret. Liam stood in the doorway, his hands resting loosely in his pockets. He felt no triumphant rush of adrenaline. He felt no righteous vindication. The rage that had sustained him for the past week had completely evaporated, leaving behind a vast, frozen wasteland in his chest. He had won the war. He had outsmarted the predator, secured his own firm's assets, and maintained his dignity. Yet, as he looked at the woman he had loved, he realized the ultimate tragedy of his victory. He had successfully demolished the infected structure, but he was still the one who had to live in the rubble. The lawyers called, Catherine whispered, not turning her head away from the window. Her voice was devoid of any emotion, entirely flat and broken. Sebastian's bail was denied. He is cooperating. He's giving them everything on his other victims for a reduced sentence. I know, Liam replied softly. The board wants me to sign the final severance documents tomorrow morning, she continued, a single tear slipping down her pale cheek, catching the dim light. I lost it, Liam. I lost everything. Liam looked at her, his expression a mask of weary sorrow. You didn't lose it, Catherine, he corrected quietly, the absolute truth hanging heavy in the cold room. You traded it. He turned away from the sunroom and walked toward the master bedroom to pack a single, leather overnight bag. The demolition was complete. It was time to clear the site. The morning brought no sunlight, only a thin, silver mist that clung to the surface of Lake Washington like a shroud. Inside the Mercer Island house, the air felt thin and sterile. Liam had finished packing the previous night, one suitcase, one garment bag, and a small box of personal blueprints. He had spent 7 years building this life, yet it fit into the trunk of a sedan in less than 20 minutes. He stood in the kitchen, the heart of the home that now felt like a gallery of expensive, cold artifacts. The marble island, where they had shared $1,000 bottles of wine and planned their future, was polished to a mirror shine. Catherine was already there, leaning against the counter. She was dressed in a simple, high-necked sweater, her hands clutching a mug of tea that she hadn't touched. She didn't look like an executive anymore. She looked like a survivor of a slow-motion wreck, dazed and waiting for the sirens to stop. Liam placed his leather briefcase on the counter. The sound of the latch was final, a heavy punctuation mark on the end of a long, exhausting sentence. The house is yours until the sale is finalized, Liam said, his voice quiet and steady. My lawyers will handle the paperwork for the Mercer Island property and the Bellevue accounts. I've instructed them to be fair. I'm not interested in a war over furniture or equity. Catherine looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for a flicker of the man who used to look at her with unconditional warmth. She found only a polite stranger, someone with a calm, architectural precision who was simply clearing a site for a new project. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice cracking. "After everything, we're just line items in a settlement?" "We became line items the moment you started trading company secrets to keep a video hidden, Catherine," Liam replied. There was no venom in his words, only a weary, absolute exhaustion. "I spent a week trying to understand how we got here. I realized that while Sebastian was the one who blackmailed you, you were the one who decided I wasn't worth the truth. You gambled our life to save your image. You won your reputation with the board for a few extra months, but you lost the only person who would have stood by you regardless of what was on that tape." Catherine looked away, a fresh wave of tears spilling over. "I was scared, Liam. I was so scared of losing you. I thought if you saw me that way, that you'd never look at me again." "You were right," Liam said softly, the honesty of it cutting through the room like a blade. "I wouldn't have looked at you the same way, but we would have been looking at the truth together. Now we're just looking at nothing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wedding ring. It was a simple band of brushed platinum, heavy and cold in his palm. He held it for a moment, remembering the day he had placed it on his finger in a sun-drenched garden in Napa, promising a lifetime of structures that would never fall. Slowly, deliberately, he placed the ring on the marble island. It didn't make a grand sound, just a soft, metallic chime that faded into the hum of the refrigerator. He picked up his briefcase and walked toward the foyer. Catherine didn't follow him. She stayed in the kitchen, a small, broken figure silhouetted against the gray mist of the lake. At the door, Liam stopped and looked back one last time. The house was beautiful, a masterpiece of glass and steel, but it was no longer a home. It was just a shell, its structural integrity compromised beyond repair. "We survived the storm, Catherine," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But we drowned in the silence." He stepped out into the cool Seattle air, the door clicking shut behind him with a soft, irrevocable sound. Liam Moore got into his car, gripped the steering wheel with steady hands, and drove away from the ruins, leaving the ring and the woman on the marble island to fade into the mist.